The morning Vivienne packed her things, she did not cry. She had cried enough in the first year. Quietly, in the small room off the kitchen that no one used, with the door pulled shut and her face pressed into the sleeve of her coat so the sound would not carry. By the second year, the tears had simply stopped coming, the way a well goes dry without announcement. And by the third, she had learned to move through the house on Carmichael Lane the way a shadow moves, present, but taking up no space anyone would notice. She folded her 2 gray dresses. She folded the blue one her mother had sent from Halifax the Christmas before last. She placed her copy of Mrs. Gaskell's North and South at the bottom of the trunk, spine up, the way her father had taught her to pack books so the binding would not crack. She did not take the pearls. They had been a wedding gift from Edmund's mother, and they had always felt around her neck, like a very polite kind of chain. Edmund Whitmore did not notice she was gone until the following Tuesday. That was the fact of it. Not an accusation, not a performance of hurt, simply the fact. He had been in Stratford for 4 days on estate business, and when he returned and found the room at the end of the hall empty, his first thought, according to what he told his solicitor some weeks later, was that she had gone to visit someone. A cousin, perhaps. He could not in that moment have named the cousin. He could not in that moment have said with certainty what color Vivienne's eyes were. She had come to the marriage at 23, the eldest daughter of Dr. Gerald Hartwell of Brantford, Ontario, a man of modest income and significant dignity, who had arranged the match with the kind of quiet desperation he never allowed anyone to see. Edmund Whitmore's family held the deed to 3 properties in Upper Canada and a dwindling reputation that still carried enough weight in Simcoe County to matter. The arrangement made practical sense. That was how her father explained it to her one Sunday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the oilcloth, not quite meeting her eyes. That it made practical sense. Vivienne had asked him, very gently, if he believed Edmund was a good man. Her father had been quiet for a long moment. "I believe he is not a cruel one," he said finally. She had accepted this. She was 23, and she was practical herself, and she understood that the world offered certain women a limited range of choices that could be dressed up in various ways but remained, at their core, what they were. Edmund Whitmore was not cruel. That much was true. He was 31 years old, dark-haired, with a formal kind of handsomeness that suited him the way a well-tailored coat suits a man who never quite relaxes. It looked right, but you sensed something underneath it that the coat was working to conceal. He spoke precisely. He kept his promises when he made them, which was rarely, because he was careful about making them. He was not unkind to the household staff. He did not drink more than was acceptable. He simply did not see her. Not from the first week, when she had suggested, tentatively, that the East Garden might benefit from some restructuring. The beds had been neglected since his mother's departure, and Vivienne had grown up watching her own mother work soil the way other women worked dough, with a kind of instinctive knowledge. And he had looked up from his papers and said, "As you like," in the tone of a man who has already returned to his thoughts before the sentence is finished. Not from the autumn, when she had quietly begun managing the household accounts that his previous housekeeper had left in spectacular disorder, working through them at the kitchen table, in the evenings after supper, reorganizing 3 years of muddled ledgers into something clean and legible. Edmund had never asked how it happened. He had simply received the corrected accounts one morning, and said nothing, which Vivienne came to understand was his version of acknowledgement. Not from the following spring, when word had come that the tenant family in the North Cottage, the Murphys, Thomas and his wife Bridget and their 4 children, had been struggling since Thomas broke his leg in the ice, and could not work. Vivienne had walked to the cottage herself, twice a week through March and into April, bringing food and sitting with Bridget at the small table while the children played on the floor. She had spoken to Edmund about reducing the Murphys' quarterly rent until Thomas was recovered. Edmund had agreed without looking up. He had not asked how she knew about the Murphys. He had not asked what she had brought them, or what Bridget Murphy had said, or whether the children were managing. He treated her suggestions the way he treated the weather, occasionally useful, never remarkable, requiring no particular response. And Vivienne, who was not a woman given to self-pity, had quietly built a life inside the life she had been given. She tended the East Garden until it was the best thing on the property. She knew every family on the estate by name, every child, every ailment, every worry. She read in the evenings. She wrote long letters to her sister Margaret in Halifax, and shorter, more careful ones to her father. She was, by every practical measure, an excellent wife. She was also entirely invisible to the man she was married to. The trouble, when it came, arrived in the form of a letter. Not a dramatic letter, not a revelation, not a confession. A letter from her father, written 2 weeks before his death, and left with the family solicitor in Brantford, with instructions to send it after he was gone. It arrived on a Wednesday in October, nearly 8 months after the funeral, which Vivienne had attended alone because Edmund had business in Stratford that week, and had expressed his condolences in a brief, correctly worded note. She read the letter at the kitchen table with her tea going cold beside her. Her father had written, "I have sometimes wondered if I did right by you, Vivienne. I told myself it was a practical arrangement. I told myself that a kind man is better than a loving one, because kindness lasts and passion does not. I want to tell you now, while I still can, that you deserved both. You always did. And if you have not found it, if you are reading this and finding that you have built a good life inside a small one, I want you to know that the building of it was yours. Whatever good is in that house is something you put there. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise, not even yourself." Vivienne sat with the letter for a long time. Then she folded it, placed it in the book she was reading, and went to tend the east garden, because the asters needed cutting back and no one else was going to do it. But something had shifted, the way ice shifts in March, invisibly, deep underneath, in a way that does not announce itself until the surface cracks. Edmund first heard his wife's name spoken with genuine feeling, by someone other than herself that November, at the Caldwells' dinner in Bury. He had not expected to hear it at all. He had assumed the evening would proceed the way these evenings always did. The same conversations in different orders, the same people saying the same things about the weather and the railways and the question of land taxes. He had been in a conversation with James Caldwell about drainage improvements when Margaret Thornton, the doctor's wife from Cookstown, had appeared at his elbow and said, entirely without preamble, "Your wife is remarkable, Mr. Whitmore, truly remarkable. I hope you know that." Edmund had not known what to say. He had said, "Thank you," because it was the correct thing to say. "She organized the entire collection drive for the Collingwood families after the fire," Mrs. Thornton said, with the particular warmth of someone who wants to make sure credit lands where it belongs. Coordinated with 3 townships. Went herself in November, Mr. Whitmore, when the roads were dreadful, to make certain the goods arrived properly. We collected more than anyone expected, far more." She paused. "She never mentioned it to you?" "She may have," Edmund said. He could not remember if she had. He spent the remainder of the dinner in a state of distraction he could not quite name. He watched Vivienne across the table. She was speaking to someone, a young woman he didn't recognize, and she was laughing, a real laugh, the kind that involved her whole face, and realized, with a discomfort he could not place, that he did not know when he had last heard her laugh like that at home. He searched his memory. He found nothing. Not because she was unhappy, precisely. She was not the kind of woman who displayed unhappiness, but because he had not been paying attention. The thought sat in him like a stone. On the drive home, he said, "Margaret Thornton spoke well of you tonight." Vivienne was looking out the window at the dark fields. "She's very kind," she said. "She mentioned something about Collingwood, a collection drive." "Yes, you went yourself, in November?" "The goods needed someone to oversee the sorting. I knew where everything was meant to go." She turned to look at him then, and her expression was the one he had come to think of as her ordinary face, composed, polite, giving nothing away, and she said, "It wasn't very remarkable." He thought about that for a long time after they arrived home, and she had gone upstairs and he was sitting alone in the study with the lamp burning. She said it wasn't very remarkable. But Margaret Thornton had looked at him like a woman, informing a man of something he ought already to know, with the particular patience of someone performing a correction. He had been corrected. He had not realized, until that moment in the carriage, how many corrections of that kind he may have missed over 3 years. Delivered quietly, through other people, because his wife had long since stopped delivering them directly. She left in January, not suddenly, or rather, not suddenly to anyone who had been watching. But Edmund had not been watching, and so to him it was sudden, the way a house fire is sudden to the man who has ignored the smell of smoke for 6 months. She did not leave a letter. She did not leave a scene. She left a note on the kitchen table, written in her clear, unhurried hand, that said, "I have gone to stay with Margaret in Halifax for some time. The household accounts are current through the end of the month. Mrs. Fielding knows where everything is. Vivienne." That was all. Edmund read it 3 times, standing in his coat with the cold still on him from coming in off the drive. Then he read it a 4th time, because he kept searching for more. Some explanation, some accusation, some demand, and there was nothing, just those sentences, clean as a ledger entry. He told himself for the first 2 weeks that she would come back, that it was a visit, that Margaret was probably unwell, or lonely, or something. He did not know much about Margaret Hartwell, had met her perhaps twice at family occasions. He told himself there was a reasonable explanation and that it did not require immediate action. He rode out over the property instead, because riding had always been the way he thought best, and found himself stopping at the east garden that was currently buried under January snow, but which he now noticed, for the first time, had a structure to it that had not been there before, a deliberate arrangement of beds and paths that someone had planned carefully, that would be beautiful in spring, that had nothing to do with anything he had ordered or arranged. He stopped at the North Cottage to speak with Thomas Murphy, whose leg had healed over the summer, and Thomas had said, "Thank you for the reduction this past year, sir." And Edmund had said he was glad it had helped, and Thomas had said, "Mrs. Whitmore coming by twice a week was the thing that really helped, though. Bridget says she doesn't know what she'd have done without it." And then Thomas had looked at him with the careful expression of a man who has said perhaps slightly more than he intended, and there had been a pause, and Edmund had said only, "Yes," and ridden on. He wrote to Vivienne in Halifax. A short letter, correct in all the formal ways, inquiring after her health and her sister's, and mentioning that he expected her return when it was convenient. She did not reply. He did not understand, at first, the full weight of what his silence had cost him. He understood it in pieces, the way a man understanding a thing he has spent years avoiding understands it. Reluctantly, slowly, each piece arriving before he was ready for the next one. He went through her room. He was not sure what he was looking for. He found the usual things, books, letters from her sister, the small pressed flower from what he realized with an odd tightening in his chest must have been the East garden kept between the pages of a journal she had not taken with her. He did not read the journal. He held it for a moment, then set it down, because reading it now would be a kind of theft, taking something she had not offered him, that she had never been given a reason to offer him. He found the household ledgers she had reorganized, 3 years of them, immaculate, each entry clear and dated and accompanied by a margin note explaining any irregularity. He recognized, going through them, decisions he had never made. An adjustment to the winter coal order that had saved them a considerable sum. A renegotiated arrangement with the grain supplier in Cookstown. Small corrections and improvements, dozens of them, all executed quietly, all delivered to him as accomplished facts he had absorbed without acknowledgement. He had called her practical, once, to Henry Ramsden at the autumn market. Henry had made some offhand comment about the marriage, and Edmund had said, with the particular cool pride of a man who has confused indifference with composure, that Vivienne was a practical woman, and that practical women suited men like him. He had meant it as a compliment. He understood now, sitting at his desk in February with the ledgers spread out before him and the house very quiet around him, that it had not been one. He wrote again to Halifax. A longer letter this time. He was not good at long letters. He was not good at saying things he was not certain of, and he was not certain of most of what he wanted to say. But he wrote it anyway, and sent it, and waited. She replied. After 3 weeks, with a letter that was courteous and brief and gave him nothing. She said she was well. She said Margaret was well. She said she hoped the property was in good order. He read it 4 times, looking for warmth. He found politeness. It occurred to him, very slowly, that she had learned to write to him the way he had always written to her. It was her father's friend, Dr. Owen Flett of Brantford, who came to see Edmund in March, uninvited, which was not like him, arriving on a Tuesday morning with the look of a man who has decided something difficult and intends to see it through. They sat in the front room, and Dr. Flett accepted tea and then said, without introduction, "I promised Gerald I would speak to you if I thought it was necessary. I think it is necessary." Edmund said nothing. "Vivienne is not in Halifax because Margaret is unwell," Dr. Flett said. "She is in Halifax because she is a woman of considerable patience who ran out of it. I am not here to instruct you in your marriage, Mr. Whitmore. I am here because her father could not be, and because he was my friend for 30 years, and because he spent the last year of his life worried that his daughter had married a man who did not know her worth." He paused. "I want to know if he was right." The room was quiet. Outside, the March wind was moving through the bare elms. Edmund said, finally, "I think he may have been." Dr. Flett looked at him for a long moment. Then he set down his cup and said, "Well, that is something at least." Edmund spent the rest of March and into April doing something he had not done in 3 years of marriage. He asked people about his wife. He asked Mrs. Fielding, who managed the house, and Mrs. Fielding told him about the Collingwood Drive and the Murphy children, and the way Vivienne had quietly renegotiated the arrangement with the laundry service in the village, when the previous one had been overcharging for 2 years. He asked the Murphys, and Bridget Murphy told him things that required him to stand in the cold outside the cottage for some minutes afterward, before he could compose himself. He asked James Caldwell and Henry Ramsden and Margaret Thornton, and each of them, in their own way, gave him the portrait of a woman he had lived with for 3 years and never once tried to see. He understood by April that the house on Carmichael Lane had been running on his wife's intelligence and care for 3 years, quietly, without comment, the way a good foundation holds a house without anyone thinking about it. He understood that the East Garden and the tenant families, and the corrected accounts and the organized household and the small courtesies extended to every person connected to the property were not the work of a practical woman doing what was expected of her. They were the work of a woman who had decided, in the absence of any other place to put her considerable capabilities, to build something good out of what she had been given. He sat down and wrote her a letter that took him 5 drafts and most of a Saturday. He did not write what he should have said, because there was no version of that sentence adequate to 3 years. He wrote instead what was true, that he had been asking people about her for 2 months, that what they had told him had changed his understanding of everything he thought he knew about his own life, and that he could not in good conscience ask her to come back without first acknowledging that what she had left was not, entirely, a home, that it had been something quieter and lonelier than a home, and that this was his doing, and that he intended to do differently, though he was aware he had not yet earned the right to make that promise to her. He wrote, "You told me once that the East Garden needed restructuring, and I said as you like and went back to my papers. I have been thinking about that for a long time. I think I said, as you like, to almost everything you offered me, and I said it in the tone of a man who doesn't expect to be shown anything worth looking at, and I was wrong about that, Vivienne. I was wrong about that from the beginning." He sent the letter. He did not expect a quick reply. He waited. She came back in May, not because of the letter, she told him, or not only because of the letter. She came back because she was a woman who made decisions with her whole mind, not just the part of her that was hurt, and she had decided, after 4 months in Halifax, that she did not want to be the kind of woman who left without ever letting the other person try. She had watched her mother make that choice, to leave before the leaving was finished, to close a door before anyone could knock on it, and she had decided she was not her mother, and that she owed herself the chance to find out what Edmund Whitmore was capable of when he was actually paying attention. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Edmund was in the East Garden when she came up the drive. He had been out there most mornings since April, doing what he could with the beds she had planned, not because he was skilled at it, but because it was the only place on the property where he felt, with some concreteness, the shape of what had been given to him and not recognized. He saw her coming, and went still. She stopped a few feet from the garden gate, and looked at what he had done with the beds she had drawn out, the seedlings he had started badly. And then, after speaking with Mrs. Murph, started somewhat better. The stone edging he had relaid along the path because the original was crooked, and it had bothered him once he actually looked at it. "You've been out here," she said. It was not a question. Most mornings, she looked at the beds for another moment. Then she looked at him, and he made himself hold her gaze, because that was the least he could do. "I haven't come back to pretend," she said. "I want you to understand that. If we are going to do this, if I am going to stay, it has to be different. Not in a small way, yes," he said. "You don't know yet what different looks like." "No," he agreed. "But I am paying attention now. That is different, at least. That I can promise you." She was quiet for a moment. The May sun was coming through the elms, and she had her hand on the garden gate, and she looked, in that moment, exactly like herself, practical and careful and entirely underestimated, and beautiful in the way that things built with real intention are beautiful, which is to say quietly and lastingly, and in a way that takes 3 years of inattention to finally notice. "All right," she said. She pushed open the gate. "Show me what you've done then. I'll tell you what you got wrong." He did. She did. And that, improbably, was where they started. The Autumn County Fair in Barrie was the first public occasion they attended together since her return, and it was there that Edmund did the thing that Vivienne had not asked for and had not expected. He was asked, as a property owner of some standing, to say a few words at the agricultural display, where 3 of their tenant families had entered their work. He had prepared something brief and adequate, the kind of remarks that are expected in that context and forgotten by dinner. But he stood up before the assembled crowd and he looked out at the faces of the Murphys and the Delaneys and the Hendersons, and at his wife standing to one side in her blue dress, and he set aside what he had prepared. He said, "I want to speak, if I may, about the work that has been done on the Whitmore property over the past several years. I have received credit for it, in various forms, in various conversations, and I want to correct that this afternoon. The tenant arrangements and the care extended to the families connected to our land, the organization of household and estate, the collection efforts for Collingwood, the attention given to every person on that property as a person and not as an abstraction. None of that was my doing. All of it, every part of it that matters, was my wife's. The fair was not quiet. Fairs never are, but the people near him were." He said, "I have been slow to understand what was in front of me. I am not going to make a performance of that. I am only going to say that Vivienne Whitmore has made every good thing that is true of that property true, and that I was wrong to let that go unsaid for as long as I did, and that I do not intend to let it go unsaid again." He stepped back. Someone began to applaud. Margaret Thornton, in the second row, and then Thomas Murphy with his big weathered hands, and then most of the people around them, in the particular way that people applaud when they feel that something right has been said. Vivienne did not cry. She had done enough of that in the small room off the kitchen, years ago, when there had been no one to hear. But she found his hand, standing there in the October sun, and held it. And he held hers back. And it was not everything. It was not 3 years returned. It was not the beginning they should have had. But it was the beginning of something true, which is sometimes the best that can be made of what is left. The fair went on around them. The elms were turning. The sky over Barry was the particular blue of Canadian October, that seems to go on longer than a sky has any right to. Vivienne looked at her husband, who was finally looking back, and she thought of her father's letter, still pressed between the pages of North and South in her trunk upstairs. The building of it was yours. Whatever good is in that house is something you put there, she thought. Yes. And now I will see what he builds with it.